And the second thing is I wrote, why is this so romantic? And why am I happy that Rhaenyra is finally having sex with her uncle? But honestly, I was happy about it.
You just have to ignore the fact that they're niece and uncle.
Yeah. I'm going to continue to not think about it for the rest of the show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Book Done Fantasy Podcast. We, Addison and Lorraine, are two best friends who love to explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Today, we are covering House of the Dragon Season 1, Episode 7. And, oh my gosh, the family drama really came to a peak in this episode. I mean, the knives were out.
Literally.
Claws were out. We got a lot to talk about in this episode, but as of today, when we are recording, we will be down to 19 days until the premiere of Season 2.
Oh my gosh, so close.
I know, we're so close. As a quick reminder, we will be discussing everything from the first season of House of the Dragon. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations. Explicit language may be used and triggering events may be discussed, so please adjust accordingly. I don't have much for housekeeping updates, so this should be pretty quick. We were running a little bit behind schedule due to life circumstances, so we pushed back our first episode of Crown of Midnight, but it should be coming out this week. So if anybody who's been keeping up with us has noticed there's been a slight delay, just know life happens, and we're working to get back on track. As far as this episode goes today, this is what you can expect. First, we will start with the State of the Realm, where we recap key events. Next, we will hold a meeting with the King's Council to analyze key events and conversations. After that, we will continue with our trial in the Fantasy Court of Law to decide which team has enough evidence to support their claim to the Iron Throne. Then, last but not least, we will also share our favorite moments from the episode. And without further ado, Addison, please update us with the State of the Realm.
Happily. We open this episode in Driftmark with everyone gathered to say their goodbyes to Lady Laena as they lay her to rest in the sea. We see with a subtle glance down at Hightower's tunic that he has been reinstated as Hand of the King. For the first time in ages, all parties are gathered in the same place at the same time. It's Laena's wake and the tension is palpable. Rhaenyra tells Jace to offer his cousins a kind and comforting word since they have both just lost their mother. A grieving Jace tells his mother that he too has equal claim to mourn and they should instead be at Harrenhal. Aegon and Aemond look on as Helena plays with yet another bug and whispers strange and seemingly nonsensical phrases repeatedly. Aegon insults Helena and Aemond defends her. He also says that if he had been the one to be betrothed to her, then he would do his duty to the realm to keep the bloodline strong. While Laenor mourns his sister's death and stares blankly into the sea, Lord Corlys tells Luke that someday he will be Lord of the Tide and rule Driftmark. A young and innocent Luke tells Corlys he doesn't want it for a heartbreaking reason. If he's the Lord of Driftmark, that means everyone is dead. Viserys approaches Daemon and tells him the time has come for him to come home. Daemon says that Pentos is his home now. Viserys persists, but Daemon brushes him off. As the wake comes to a close, an ailing Viserys confuses Alicent for Aemma, and Aegon is so drunk that he is basically passed out on the stairs. An aggravated Hightower kicks him and tells him to go to bed. Back in the Hall of Nine, Corlys and a grieving Rhaenys discuss the circumstances surrounding Laena's death, but the conversation quickly turns back into the same conversation we've heard before. Corlys feels indignant about Rhaenys being passed over for the crown, and Rhaenys has moved past it long ago. Rhaenys accuses Corlys of not truly being upset on her behalf, but having an unquenchable thirst for power. Rhaenys speaks plainly and says that she wants Driftmark to pass to Baela instead of Luke, to true Valyrian blood. Rhaenys lays all the cards on the table and says what we all know to be true. Rhaenyra's children are not biologically Laenors. Corlys' response is dismissal, citing that history does not remember blood, it remembers names. Late in the evening, Rhaenyra and Daemon takes a romantic stroll on the beach. They have a heart-to-heart, and to no one's surprise, they end up having sex. Meanwhile, Aemond shoots a shot with Vhagar, and Vhagar puts him through his paces, but he manages to hang on and returns back to Driftmark, victorious. A curious Baela, Rhaena, Jace, and Luke go to investigate who is behind stealing Vhagar. The children run into Aemond, who is still flying high from his success in bonding Vhagar. The confrontation quickly turns violent, only ending when Luke strikes Aemond across the face with a knife. The Kingsguard arrives moments after Aemond has been struck, and all the children are brought before an angry king. Let me just interject here and say this scene was wild. There was a lot happening all at once, so here are the highlights. Aemond will lose the eye. The king has fucking had it and rants. Basically, he wants to know why everybody can't just get along. Viserys orders everyone to kiss and make up, but that's not good enough for Alicent, who decides to take matters into her own hands. Alicent grabs Viserys. Literally. She took that shit into her hands. Okay. Literally.
Oh, yeah.
Literally. Alicent grabs Viserys' knife and tries to attack one of Rhaenyra's children, but Rhaenyra blocks her. For what seems like an eternity, they face each other in a deadly standoff, only ending when Alicent steps back, cutting Rhaenyra's arm as she does. As the dust settles, Hightower comes to visit Alicent and tells her he's proud of her. That's not fucked up at all, considering she just tried to kill her stepdaughter. As Rhaenyra is stitched up by a maester, Laenor comes in. It seems he's had a bit of an existential crisis. He tells Rhaenyra he's going to really commit to the family, but he's too little too late. Rhaenyra and Daemon speak candidly, in Old Valyrian, might I add. You know how much we love that. Their conversation carries ominous undertones of foul play as they discuss the fact they could only get married if Laenor were dead. We cut to a scene of Daemon talking to Sir Carl. He gives him a bag of coins and says, make it a clean death. But wait, who is that guy? And why is Daemon snapping some random dude's neck? Huh? Why are Laenor and Carl sword fighting in the Hall of Nine? No, not Laenor. Oh my god, they put his body in the fireplace. That's so fucked up. Plot twist, it was all a ploy, a ruse. We've been bamboozled. Laenor and Carl are seen on a rowboat headed towards a ship that will take them to the Free Cities, where they can live a life of luxury and pleasure, free from the burdens of court life. With Laenor now dead, major air quotes there, Daemon and Rhaenyra get married, and Addison wonders to herself why the hell she is rooting for Rhaenyra to marry her uncle.
I think we're all wondering why.
I was like, why is this so romantic? They literally killed someone so they could get married.
I know. At least they didn't actually kill Laenor. Anyways, all right. Thank you for that update, Addison. We got a lot of things to discuss. So to the King's Council we go.
Oh, yeah. So, of course, as always, we have to talk about the title of the episode. And the title of this episode is Driftmarked. This one's pretty self-explanatory. There's not really a lot of analysis here. The entire episode takes place in Driftmark and follows the aftermath of Laena's funeral. We also know that Driftmark is where Lord Corlys and Rhaenys have their castle. In that castle is the Hall of Nine, which we've talked about in previous episodes, and something very important goes down here at the end of the episode. But I didn't really think there was a lot more to expand upon in terms of what the title might mean. I think it's really just indicative of the setting of the entire episode. We open this episode with the scene of Lady Laena's funeral. Honestly, the scene was so heartbreaking. I feel like it really set the tone for the rest of the episode. And I thought it was interesting that basically everyone is in attendance. The king is there, the Hightowers, the Velaryons, Daemon, Rhaenyra, all of the kids. And the scene is also important because as the camera is cutting from different people in their perspective, we also cut to Otto Hightower, and he glances down at his tunic, and we see that he is wearing the pin from the hand of the king, and it's been revealed to us as a watcher, that doesn't sound right. It has been revealed to us as an audience member that he has been reinstated as a viewer. Thank you. Okay. I'm like, what do we call that? A watcher. Okay. And as a viewer, it has now been revealed to us that Hightower has been reinstated as Hand of the King.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that right off the bat. My one note, or maybe it's two notes really, is that first we see Aemond speaking in Valyrian, and he has an interesting line where he says, salt courses through Valyrian blood. Ours runs thick, ours runs true, ours must never thin. And he says this while looking directly at Rhaenyra, which I thought was kind of interesting because, you know, in like a public sense, he says that, but it's also kind of this dig, more or less, because he's looking at her. And then the other interesting thing is then Daemon laughs.
Yes.
That, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's like a nervous tick or he's just like, this is all ridiculous because people keep dying because of this idea that blood is really important and, you know, family lines need to be kept pure, etc., etc. I don't know. What was your thought about why he laughed?
Yeah, you know, I watched that scene a couple of times because it's very jarring when he starts laughing because everybody is crying or they're looking very somber, and then he laughs very audibly. I really couldn't make heads or tails of it, honestly. I actually put a note. I hope Lorraine knows what this is about because I don't.
Your guess is as good as mine.
It really didn't make sense to me. Honestly, I think probably the best guess is what you said about everyone knows that Rhaenyra's children are not Laenor's children, right? And the little bit that we do know about Corlys's brother as a character is that he is very into pure bloodlines, because we know in later episodes he wants to contest the claim for Driftmark after Corlys passes away. And so maybe it is a dig at Rhaenyra, and Daemon just thinks that's funny. I mean, Daemon doesn't really care what anyone thinks, whether it's appropriate for him to laugh or not. So I don't know. That's my best guess.
Anyways, shortly after the funeral, everybody is outside on the landing. They're eating, milling about. Notably, it's very dark, which I think was pretty intentional in the way that they filmed it to make it feel very heavy, but also a little ominous because everybody's definitely on edge. The first thing that we see is that Rhaenyra walks in. She first makes eye contact with Daemon. Then she sees Alicent watching both of them. And then she walks over to her son, Jace, and asks where Laenor is. She tells Jace he should speak to his cousins, and Jace says, I have an equal claim to sympathy, which I feel really bad for Jace and her kids, because obviously their father died too, and they have to mourn in utter silence. But I did think that it was nice that she still encourages her kids to go and comfort others and be supportive as much as possible. But shortly after Jason's response, Rhaenyra very quickly warns him that the Valyrians are our kin. The Strongs are not. Obviously, this makes sense given that they're in a public situation, and with all the rumors swirling about, she really needs to make it clear that we're not going to talk about the Strongs.
Ever.
Save
ever.
that for, maybe in private, but never in public, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, it's especially sad for them, too, because it wasn't just their biological father that died, but also their grandfather, because Lionel dies in the fire, too. So they lost two close relatives in the fire, too, which is sad. But no, you're absolutely right. They cannot discuss it, and definitely not when Alicent is nearby.
Oh, yeah. Everybody's listening, too. As they're having this conversation, Alicent is watching Rhaenyra speak to Jace. And then Viserys also looks over to see Daemon looking at him. And I just thought it was interesting that they're panning over to everybody watching each other. It feels very similar to Rhaenyra's wedding to Laenor that night, where things are tense. Everybody's watching everyone else. But it also simultaneously feels like they were all wanting to reach out to each other. I think everybody realizes in this moment that they do need their family, but obviously it's kind of too late now. That ship has sailed. The family dynamic will never be the same. So
yeah. Well, I think overall the tone of the event is just very somber and solemn. And as we mentioned earlier, this is the first time that they've all been together in one place, and who knows how long, right? A really, really long time. And so I think there's a lot of feelings being had about a lot of different people and situations. And we see some of those play out later on screen. Daemon and Rhaenyra.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Right. As the scene continues, we cut to Aegon and Aemond, and they look on as Helaena plays with a spider. Again, she's got a thing with bugs. It still weirds me out, not going to lie. But as she is playing with the spider, she repeatedly says, hand turns loom, spool of green, spool of black, dragons of flesh, weaving dragons of thread. And she repeats this, almost chanting it over and over again. So as we talked about, I believe maybe it was last episode. In a previous episode, there is a portion where Helaena makes essentially what we would call a prophecy, when Aemond is talking about how he wishes to have a dragon, and she says he'll have to close an eye. As we know, that premonition prophecy is fulfilled in this episode. So, as always, on Helaena alert. And I did a little bit of digging. Thank you, Reddit. Thank you, the internet, for helping me figure out what this means. There are a lot of turn of phrases in what she's saying, and a lot of double meaning in the words, because hand turns loom. Obviously, there's a literal sense. A hand turns a loom. A loom is a tool meant for turning yarn into fabric, right? But that's not what we're talking about here. The hand of the king is Otto Hightower. And we know that you can interpret that in a couple of ways. Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, is plotting. He's looming over the proceedings. And I believe it's in the next time on House of the Dragon, there's a cut of him where he says, war looms upon us, or something like that. So there's another reference to the word loom. The second part of that quote is spool of green, spool of black. Obviously, we're going with a loom metaphor. So yarn, a spool of yarn, spool of green, spool of black. Of course, we know this is clearly a reference to the division of the two teams, Team Green and Team Black. This is, in addition, a reference to Hightowers when they call their banners to war. They like the beacon green. This is also evident in a lot of the costuming in the show, not to mention the entire advertising campaign for season 2. So clearly she's alluding to the differences between the two teams for the Iron Throne. And then last one, she says, dragons of flesh weaving dragons of thread. This is probably the most ambiguous part of the phrase that is not as easily interpretable based on what I found on the Reddits. It could mean a couple of different things. So dragon of flesh most likely refers to the different Targaryens. Alicent's children with King Viserys on one side, they're the blood of the dragon, and Rhaenyra's children on the other, again, blood of the dragon. It could also be a reference to the actual literal dragons they have bonded that they will almost certainly use in battle against each other. And then when they say dragons of thread, it's possibly a reference to the banners that they will ride into war, but it could also be a reference to Rhaenyra's children. To me, that was the most difficult part of the phrase to interpret, but overall you can take Helena's chanting as a premonition or a prophecy for the Dance of the Dragons, the war that is to come. Obviously, we're going to be on the lookout for that in season 2, but I don't think that one is as heavy-handed as the previous one where she's like, you'll have to close an eye. And that one is pretty hook, line, and sinker. We know what she's talking about. But I find all of her scenes very interesting in what she says and then how they play out later in different episodes.
Yeah. That's very true. The only thing that I could think of for this particular premonition of hers was just in relation to the war that's coming and how maybe this episode like really well, I say this every episode, but
right.
How it really just keeps tipping more and more over the edge. And obviously later in the episode, we have a massive fight take place over Aemond's eye and everything. So that's a pretty direct attack right there happening.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, I do feel like in this episode, this is the first time that weapons are drawn and so is blood, right? So you could really make the argument that this scene is when the actual war starts in a very micro sense. But Alicent draws blood from Rhaenyra and it escalates after that, right?
And well, and Rhaenyra's kids.
Oh yes, of course.
How
did I forget that?
Stabbed out.
Literally, yeah.
Right, so.
Whoops. While Helena makes this weird chanting phrase repeated, Aegon and Aemond watching her, because she's on the floor, just kind of like distance observing her. And Aegon is insulting her. She's an idiot and she's nothing like us. And Aemond, he comes to her defense a little bit. And he's like, she's our sister. And Aegon says, why don't you marry her then? So this was the first time it's revealed to us, the viewer, that Aegon and Helena are betrothed to be married. So this is for a couple reasons. We're in the fantasy court of law. But regardless, Aegon is very dismissive of the idea and kind of outright hostile. He's very insulting. And Aemond comes to her defense and he says, if it were me, I would do my duty to the realm and to strengthen our bloodline. And I thought this conversation really juxtaposes the difference between Aegon and Aemond. Aegon is obviously the oldest. He's heir to the throne. Aemond is technically second after Aegon if something were to happen to him. And I think Aemond wants the throne. I really do. And I know we're going to see that play out later in their interactions, that Aemond is perpetually frustrated by Aegon's disrespect to the Iron Throne and the realm and what it means to be heir. And I feel like this conversation is the first seeds we see of that, the discontent between the two over how they relative positions of importance in the court.
Yeah, I definitely felt the same thing. I didn't realize that they were betrothed already. I just thought he was
Well,
making a joke and was like, well, you marry her or whatever. But I guess it's confirmed later, so
yeah.
that makes sense. Moving along, again, we have multiple different things happening at the same time. So Lara stares at Alicent and Kristen Kroll notices and he's like, do you want me to do something about it? And she's like, no, it's only a look of pride. Laris is the new Lord of Harrenhal, which two things about that. Number one, nobody really knows that Alicent and Laris have this relationship. She's really kept it under wraps and she wants to keep it that way. And two, Laris is the new Lord of Harrenhal because he murdered his brother and his dad.
Yeah.
So next, we also see that Corlys speaks to Lucerys off to the side, and he says, Lord of the Tides rules the seas. And then Lucerys says, sorry, I don't want it. Corlys is very taken aback by that, and he's like, it's your birthright. And then Lucerys says, if I'm the Lord of Driftmark, it means everyone's dead.
That literally made me want to cry because he's just so small. You forget sometimes that they're all just kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think Aegon is maybe 14 or 15, but Aemond, Rhaena, Baela, Jace, Luke, they're little. None of them, I don't think, are over 10, 11, 12 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just something to hear because he's right.
Is.
If he is Lord of the Tide of Driftmark, it's because everyone gone. That was so
I know. My note here was just, they're also perceptive, and Lucerys is really aware of how many people have died so far. In the next scene, this is where we have Laenor, who hasn't been involved in the landing at all. He's pretty much removed himself from the crowd, but he's just standing in the sea looking very sad. Then when he comes back up, I think it was Corlys who grabs Carl and tells him to grab his patron in front of everyone. And even I think his brother was like, Corlys, back off a little bit, because obviously it's pretty risky to make a comment like that out in public. But you can tell that Laenor is really very depressed. I mean, he's already been down in the dumps about just his
existence.
Yeah. I don't really know what his deal is. I mean, you've had it pretty good, all considering, but I think his sister's death really pushed him over the edge.
Yeah. I think for Laenor, our assessment that he really has an existential crisis in this episode is pretty accurate. Having his sister die so young, she could have been in 20s, maybe 30s. I think a lot of people have the tendency when someone close to them dies at a young age, especially, they take stock of their life and evaluate their choices. And I think you really see that human element of Laenor's character shine through in these brief moments with him.
Yeah. In the next scene, we have Viserys speaking to Daemon. This was interesting because obviously Viserys and Daemon haven't really spoken to each other in quite a while. Viserys had given a look to him, kind of begging him to move past everything, but Daemon's kept his distance more or less. But I do have the conversation. He says, your girls are the very image of their mother, a comfort and an anguish, as I well remember. The gods can be cruel. And then Daemon says, it seems they've been especially cruel to you. Yes, you should return with us to King's Landing. It's time that you came home. Pentos is my home and that of my children. Daemon, I know we've had our differences, but let them pass with the years. There's a place for you in my court if that's something you should need. And then Daemon just ends with, I need nothing. This stuck out to me because Viserys has had years to repair that relationship, but again, it's too late. The damage has been done, and I think he is now realizing with his own death right around the corner, basically, and all the tension really rising with the family, he's taking note of how important it is for family to stick together. But Daemon ultimately perceives this as just a pity offer because he's like, why are you coming to me now of all times you kept dismissing me, so why would I take your help now? But I did think that was sad because I was like, oh, it would have been nice, I guess, for them if they had been able to have a better relationship prior to this. But
I think Daemon ultimately has too much pride. He feels that he's been passed over by Viserys again and again. And even though he really probably would love to repair the relationship, I think he just can't get out of his own way.
Very true. So anyway, Daemon walks off in Otto next offers some condolences, and Daemon simply says, no matter how fat the leech grows, it always wants for another meal. Which, again, we've known that Daemon has never liked Otto. He's always known that Otto is playing his own game and has been interfering to get his own way.
No, I feel like what's a callback way back to the first episode. Remember in the tourney where he asked Alicent for his favor and he picks Otto Hightower's son. So, I mean, are we surprised with this interaction? No. But that was bold of him to just openly insult him in front of people. But that's what we love about Shadow Daddy Daemon.
I know. I'm like, say it a little louder. Let it be known what he's really doing.
Say it a little louder.
For the people in the back. So as those two conversations played out between Daemon and Viserys and then Daemon with Otto, Rhaenyra has been watching both of them, and she follows Daemon out after he speaks. Then shortly after that, Viserys also leaves to go to bed and addresses Alicent as Aemma.
Awkward. So awkward.
Super awkward. Viserys' health has been declining. We've seen that, but I think this is also where we really start to see that his mind is also going. We've seen his physical health declining with the wounds and the loss of his fingers and all that stuff, but we can really see that his actual brain is starting to go a little bit as well. Also, Viserys has always loved Aemma, and he literally never got over it. As the funeral reception winds down, we see that Aegon, who's been drinking his way through this funeral, just having himself a time, is really fucked up, and he's like laying on the ground, and Hightower comes up to him, just kicks him, and he's like,
literally kicks the shit out of him.
I just thought it was really rude. And we've seen all of this stuff with the fact that Alicent in general hasn't been super kind to her kids, if you ask me. But same with Hightower, honestly, which I'm like, you wanted your kids to be on the throne, but you treat them like shit. I just don't really understand that, especially as their grandfather.
I think Hightower is frustrated because Aegon has never, and in this moment, it's not acting like the heir to the Iron Throne. It's not comporting himself with dignity or grace or respect that the occasion deserves. And so honestly, I think he's just like, you're being a piece of shit right now. You're literally passed out drunk at a fucking funeral. Okay.
That's true.
Funeral.
That's true.
And so I think he's just had it with his behavior, because we'll see this in later episodes. Aegon is really a piece of shit. He does absolutely a lot of bad shit. And I'm sure they all know that. And they're just tired of his behavior, would like him to act with at least a little more dignity in public, at bare minimum.
That's true. And in part of it, I think it's just Aegon's nature, but I do think part of it, it's like that whole nature versus nurture thing. But I do think he wasn't treated the best. But you do kind of see that difference between the way that Rhaenyra interacts with her kids versus how Alicent and Hightower and stuff. And I think that does definitely influence the way that they behave. Next, we see Carl bring a drunk Laenor back, and he's stumbling off. And we hear the dragon cry, and presumably it was Vhagar that was flying overhead. Aemond was watching as that dragon flies overhead, and obviously we know why, because he's got big plans later.
Yeah, he does. Big plans.
And this is where we enter another major conversation. After the funeral ends, we cut scenes to the Hall of Nine. Rhaenys is upset about Laena's death and blames Daemon for not bringing the family back to Driftmark. And Corlys says, you are looking to place blame for an act of the gods. Rhaenys responds with, mayhaps the gods have scored us for our insatiable pride. I gave up the idea of wearing a crown generations ago. It is you, Lord Husband, who refuses to abandon this pursuit, even now at the cost of our children. So this is the underlying theme of most of this show, right? Is that we have the continual death of people as they try to make power plays, and it continues on in this cycle. I think Rhaenys is right. I mean, he's been pushing for this marriage because he knows that it helps his own family's standing and rank, and perhaps gets Corlys a little closer to the action as well. But Rhaenys is really fed up with all of that, right? She really just wants her family to be safe. And this was a concern she had for Laenor when Rhaenyra and Laenor were married. In the next part of their conversation, Rhaenys asks for Driftmark to pass down to Baela through Laena's line rather than Laenor. Then Corlys responds with, "You asked me to cast an even bigger shadow over those little boys than already exists." Rhaenys says, "We are alone here, husband. You can speak the plain truth as we both know it." Corlys says, "History does not remember blood. It remembers names." Obviously, this was a very interesting conversation. First off, I see parallels between Rhaenys, Daemon, and Rhaenyra in the scene. So Rhaenys recognizes that women are undercut and undervalued. In the beginning of the show, we see she has given up on the idea that women will rule. And now, with the death of her child, who wasn't at home when she died because of where her husband decided the family should be, she feels scorned, right? We know Daemon wanted his family out of the game and out of harm's way, but regardless, death still found them anyway. Rhaenys similarly wants to stay out of things for fear more death will follow, but Rhaenys also does not see an opportunity for women to gain a foothold. And so by suggesting Baela to be heir to Driftmark is kind of taking a page out of Rhaenyra's book and is now advocating for women to be in ruling position. She's figuring out a different way to play the game a little bit. But also we see that Corlys and Rhaenys see differently on this issue. Corlys is in denial about the reality of Rhaenyra and Laenor's children, likely because he realizes that if anybody knows that they're really acknowledging that in a serious manner, then that's not great for him. He also asserts that true blood means little. Names are everything. So I'm not exactly sure where he was going with that. I guess it's more or less true, but...
Yeah. When I reflect on Corlys' last statement of that conversation is that history doesn't remember blood, it remembers names. I think that is very indicative of Corlys' character because, as we know, a huge part of House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones is pure bloodlines, right? That's why they had sister marry brother, and a lot of the emphasis is put on bloodlines and marrying strong houses. And I think Corlys is, well, two things. I think first, Corlys is in the same position that Viserys is in that he realizes it would damn them all if he acknowledged in any public way that Laenor was not the father of Rhaenyra's children. It would ultimately end in the children probably being killed, maybe Rhaenyra, possibly even major implications for Laenor. Right. So I think it's a protective measure and strategy for them. But I also think that Corlys is wise in the idea that there's no DNA testing. 100 years from now, no one's going to remember those rumors. But Corlys only has something to lose, right? Because when he dies and he's gone, Velaryons would have been on the throne. I mean, technically they'll be Targaryen when they ascend the throne, but Velaryon heirs will continue to be on the throne. And I think ultimately Corlys realized the blood doesn't matter, that the name does, because come on, you don't think over the course of hundreds and hundreds of years someone bastard child ended up on the throne. Like, that has to have happened. And ultimately nobody cares or remembers, but they remember the name. And so I think that is very indicative and reflective of Corlys' very prideful nature, and that he's very proud of his name, and that when people hear his name, they associate it with power and conquest and reputation or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's almost like it doesn't matter because they'll just be Targaryens once they ascend anyway. So no one's even going to question.
Possible.
Yeah. Anyways, I mean, he's right. Or it tends to work that way. But yeah, very interesting conversation between the two of them. Shortly after, we cut to the next scene and we have another dynamic duo having a conversation and interactions with each other. And that duo is...
Conversation, huh?
Oh, yeah. So that duo is the Rhaenyra and Daemon. And honestly, immediately my mind just went back to their city escapades back when Rhaenyra was like 15 or whatever. Oh, yeah. Rhaenyra admits that Laenor was uninvolved more as a husband than anything else. She also confirms that they did try to conceive a child, but it never worked out, so she found other avenues. And her affair with Harwin was indeed one of love and desire, which I thought that was cute. But it was also good because I think we had questioned before about whether or not they actually did try, or was it a never tried situation? But yeah, they did confirm for us that tried to do it, was not possible for whatever reason.
Yeah, there was ambiguity on the logistics of potential intimacy. So it sounds like they did try. And I think later Rhaenyra even says that in a conversation with Laenor that she did hope to bear his children the few times. Yeah, which kind of heartbreaking. Yeah.
Because obviously they would have avoided many of their issues.
All of the issues.
I know. So Rhaenyra then says, I should have forbidden Harwin from returning to the Riverlands. Harren's curse is said to be as strong as it was after the conquest, which Daemon says that's a ghost story. And obviously Otto and the Queen would love for them to believe that this was just a cursed thing, when in reality, it was very much planned. They also go on to have other conversations. And through all of this, Rhaenyra confirms that she felt like she was abandoned by Daemon. And from Daemon's perspective, he believed that he did Rhaenyra a favor by sparing her because she was still very young and he didn't want to exploit her in that manner. But from Rhaenyra's perspective, she really needed Daemon's support because she felt like he was the only person that did have her back, more or less, at the time. As she's grown up and gone on, she feels like a lot of the things that have happened wouldn't have happened if Daemon had been there. And then we also see that Daemon doesn't say that he loved Laena, but it is implied that he did care for them. He says we were happy enough.
Yeah.
So things were going decently well for him. Rhaenyra obviously had a relationship with Harwin that was loving, and it unfortunately didn't work out. But at the very end of that, Rhaenyra apologizes to Daemon for the loss of Laena. It was a very nice conversation between them. And we know that Rhaenyra always cared for Daemon. I think that Daemon's actually pretty compassionate. He didn't want to do anything to Rhaenyra when she was still a child, and he did his best to protect her in whatever version that is for Daemon. Anyways, after their touching conversation, they continue walking, and they find a little driftwood beach hut. And what do they do in there? They do the deed.
What do you
Like, it's been a long time coming.
Can you describe it? What does that mean, Lorraine? Do the
They
deed?
had sex. S-E-X. Sex.
Was that hard for you to say, Lorraine?
Sometimes I'm like, oh, I feel spicy today. I'm going to say everything. Other days I'm like, I'll be
Listen,
chill.
You said the C word in the last episode, and you were
That's
totally
true.
fine with it.
I know. That's what I'm saying. You never know. Anyways, it was a long time coming. You know, there's years of anticipation going into that.
Years. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I only have two things to say about that. The first is, I know this is a very common complaint for House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, but Jesus fucking Christ, that scene was so dark visually. I couldn't see what the fuck was going on. Like, I literally turned off all the lights everywhere. I turned my brightness all the way up, and I was like, I think they're kissing.
Squinty.
Yes, literally, I couldn't see shit. So obviously that was annoying because I want to see the spicy part. And then the second thing is I wrote, why is this so romantic? And why am I happy that Rhaenyra is finally having sex with her uncle? But honestly, I was happy about it.
I know. You have to ignore the fact that they're niece and uncle.
Yeah. I'm going to continue to not think about it for the rest of the show.
Me too.
Sounds good. And we encourage you all to do the same so that you can enjoy it as much as we do.
Yes.
So while Rhaenyra and Daemon are doing the deed, we cut to my favorite scene of the entire episode. And this is where Aemond shoots his shot, and he decides that he is going to attempt upon Vhagar. So if you recall, Vhagar was Laena's dragon. Of course, Laena has now passed away, which makes Vhagar a free agent, ready for anyone to draft him. So important to know in general for the show, Vhagar is the oldest living dragon. He's by far the largest. He is an absolute monster behemoth giant. You can see a couple shots of him throughout the episode, and it's pretty obvious that he is mourning the loss of his rider. So when Aemond goes to approach him, he is just taking a nap on the beach. And you can see that, understandably, Aemond is very nervous. He's basically shaking, which I would be too if I was approaching a giant fire-breathing dragon. But as he continues to approach, Vhagar wakes up. And you see that just Vhagar's eye is the size of Aemond's entire head. So just like from perspective there. And Aemond almost shits himself. But he bucks up, gets his courage, and he says some words in Old Valyrian to Vhagar. Vhagar opens his mouth as if he's about to incinerate him, and he tells him to stop. And eventually, Aemond just decides to climb up on Vhagar's back. Now, I love the scene for so many reasons. The tension that's built between a dragon and its rider. This is the first time in the show that we actually see a bond between a dragon and its rider outside of one that is from birth, right? Because in a previous episode, I think it's Jace and his dragon in the dragon pit, but the egg hatched when Jace was a baby, and that's kind of how their bond is solidified. So this is the first time you see how a rider can bond an existing dragon outside of that initial bond. So that was really cool to see. So he climbs onto Vhagar's back and he commands him to fly. Vhagar takes off, and that scene is, honestly, it's so funny. Vhagar does not take it easy on Aemond at all. He is twisting and turning and diving, and you see Aemond almost fall off a couple times. And there's a brief moment where you're like, oh my God, he's going to fall to his death. But he hangs in there. And during that sequence, they cut to Baela and Rhaena, and they see Vhagar taking off. And so they wake up Jace, and they're like, oh, someone's stealing Vhagar. So they're setting you up for the next scene immediately after this. But Vhagar puts Aemond through his paces to see if he's worthy. And he was. And the bond is solidified. It was giving How to Train Your Dragon vibes. When Hiccup bonds Toothless, and Toothless is like, I'm going to show you. I'm going to get you to fall off me. That's really what it reminded me of. And I always find those scenes really impressive too, because visually to us, we see a dragon, but to the actor, it's literally a green screen. So I can only imagine how difficult it would be to act in those scenes where you're literally looking at nothing, sitting on an empty saddle in front of a green screen in a studio.
Just like, pretend.
Exactly. And so I thought overall that scene was just really impressive and directed really well and just really visually interesting. And of course, it is super, super important that Aemond has bonded Vhagar, the most powerful dragon, because this greatly bolsters Team Green and strengthens their arsenal, so to speak. Of course, it also leads to the events immediately after this scene. So Aemond, flying high, he's got a dragon, he's feeling like he's hot shit, and he runs into Baela and Rhaena, which, just a side note, in the previous episode, I had a really hard time telling Baela and Rhaena apart. I Googled it because I was trying to make sure that I said the right name at the right time. I was like, oh, they're twins? No wonder I can't tell them apart. But just a little disclaimer in the description of this scene. If I mix up Baela and Rhaena, don't come for me, okay? I tried to keep up with it, but a lot happens very quickly, okay? I also mix up Jace and Luke. I'm just like one of Rhaenyra's kids. So Baela and Rhaena, they go down to confront. They don't know that it's Aemond. They just know that someone stole, quote unquote, Vhagar, and they run into Aemond. Aemond immediately starts talking shit to them. Baela is very upset because she says that Vhagar wasn't his to claim, and Aemond's like, too bad, so sad. First come, first serve. And this starts a physical altercation between the two. The conflict rapidly escalates, and it really hits its peak when Aemond picks up a rock, because at first I think they would have just really pummeled each other, but when Aemond picks up the rock and basically declares his intent to kill Jace, that's when it turns violent and deadly, right? So Aemond, he says something to the effect of, you'll die as a nameless bastard, just like your father, or something like that.
Yeah, he said, you will die screaming in flames, just as your father did, bastards.
Okay, yes, yes. The important thing there is that he calls them bastards, right? And this comes up later in the conversation in the aftermath, and is super, super important, a key component of how the aftermath of this conflict plays out. But There's a very defined moment when he picks up that rock and declares his intent that you can feel this palpable tension and shift in all of the kids' demeanor. Before, they're just kind of roughhousing, but he really raises the stakes because he really could kill one or both of them, right? So Jace is on the ground and he throws dirt into Aemond's eyes, and Luke picks up his knife and he slashes Aemond across the face with the knife. Aemond, of course, falls to the ground. And then the King's Guard promptly comes in right after. And this is important for several reasons, but ultimately leads to my second favorite scene in the entire episode, which I labeled affectionately the post-kid fight scene.
The post-kid fight, the adult fight scene.
Exactly.
Yeah, that whole scene was just very intense. I felt like it was hard to watch because I'm not a big fan of watching children fight, but I did think it was badass that Laena and Bela were fighting too. They just jumped right in there and started beating them up. They didn't just stand there and let Jace and Luke handle it. They got right in there, and I was like, all right, okay.
I think Bela throws the first punch, but whatever one of the twins throws the first punch, she has a mean right hook. I mean, she just no hesitation. I was like, you go, girl. She kicked his ass.
Yeah. I can see kind of why Aemond picked up the rock because, I mean, they were really digging into him. They were all mad, but his face was bleeding. He was all cut up and stuff by that point when he finally picked it up. And I think he was over it. He's been getting shit on by the older brother and then his cousins up until this point, too. He was always the oddball out, always the one getting picked on. So I think he kind of had it. This his final straw.
I think the scene really shows a shift in how he feels about himself. Once he bonds Vhagar, I think it really inflames his sense of self-importance and superiority, right? Not only did he bond a dragon, but he bonded fucking a Vhagar, right? And so, I mean, how could you not be like, I'm the shit, right? Come at me, bro.
Yeah, honestly, at first you're like, oh, how dare he? But then you're also like, oh my God, holy shit, he did it.
Oh yeah, it's fucking awesome.
It takes a lot of balls. Most people wouldn't have gotten up there to be like, oh yeah, let me go get the biggest fucking dragon. Scare him while he's sleeping too, you know?
Seriously, you gotta give it to him.
So cutting to the next scene, obviously by now, all the adults are awake. They're all gathered. Everyone knows that Aemond's eye is cut out and all the kids are bloody and battered from their fight. Viserys first yells at the guards and admonishes them for failing to watch the children. The maester, soon after that, confirms that Aemond's eye is lost. The flesh around it will heal, but eye's gone. He's not getting them back. And I thought it was interesting that Alicent yells at Aegon first, because Aegon is not really responsible for what happened. None of the kids really were. They shouldn't have been left unsupervised, but also everyone thought they were asleep. So I did feel like that reaction was pretty unnecessary on Alicent's part, because Aegon was like, what did I do? And she's like, you should have been watching your brother, and really digs into him.
I think that response is indicative of a conversation we've had many times on this podcast about how Alicent feels isolated, and her only system of support is quite literally her children and her father, right? Because Viserys ain't there for her. And so in conversation with Aegon, she feels that, again, he doesn't bear the responsibility of being heir, and also that he doesn't understand the gravity of the situation that they're in, and that they all really need to stick together and look out for each other. And so honestly, it's a little unreasonable, but at the same time, I think I see where she's coming from.
I understand the situation, but Aemond was asleep too. Was he supposed to be awake watching Aemond the whole time? Nobody knew what these kids were about to go do. And so, I don't know, I just thought it was really extreme. But anyways, Viserys demands the truth from Aemond, because he wants to know who did this to you, how did this happen? And Rhaenyra steps in and says insults were levied against them, and they were forced to defend themselves. They tell Viserys that Jace and Luke were called bastards. And then right after that, you immediately see Alicent's face fall, because she knows it's kind of game over for Aemond, right? It's a lost cause to argue anything now that the idea of Rhaenyra's kids being bastards has been brought forth. Viserys isn't going to go for that, and she knows that. Rhaenyra says, my sons are to inherit the Iron Throne, my grace. This is the highest of treasons. And then she demands that Aemond be questioned to figure out where he learned this. And of course, we're all sitting there like,
Indeed, where did he hear such a lie? Yeah.
Alicent then was watching all of this horrified, and she's just like, over an insult, my son literally lost an eye, and you're demanding all of this. But Viserys continues to demand an answer, and Aemond says it was Aegon, which again thought was interesting because you can see the relief in Alicent's eyes to know that she wasn't outed.
Oh, yeah.
But now her other kid's in trouble.
Well, I think Aemond makes a calculated decision there and knows that the consequences for Alicent are much more severe than for Aegon, right? Because Aegon is a child still, and I think it could be played off as just young boys being stupid and full of themselves and throwing at each other. Where if it's Alicent, that is much more indicative of calculated treason.
That's true. That's a fair point, yeah. But anyway, this is where the balloon pops, right? And Aegon just says, we know, Father. Everyone knows. Just look at them.
Crickets.
Yeah, it just goes very quiet. Very awkward for everybody, right? Because what's Viserys going to do? Is he going to acknowledge that? Or is he going to sweep it under the rug? And good old Viserys.
Fucking Viserys.
He ultimately demands that they all apologize and make up because they are family.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
The sheer shock on everyone's faces. A truth bomb was just dropped, and he's just like, deny, deny, deny. Mm-hmm. But then again, I'm not really sure what else Viserys is going to do.
Yeah.
He can't kill his own son or really punish him, but he also can't agree that Rhaenyra's sons are bastards. It's just a lose-lose situation, like it's always been. Mm-hmm. Continuing on, Alicent demands that Viserys' reasoning is insufficient, and she wants an eye for an eye. And Viserys says, do not allow your temper to guide your judgment, but Alicent just really won't let it go because she's had it. She's tired of being denied. She's tired of being made to feel like her observations are not true. Viserys is kind of gaslighting her to some extent, just being like, no, ignore it, move on. But she then commands Kristen to take Lucerys' eye. And then, I don't know, that was a moment where I understand that you're really angry, but it's petty. If you're an adult, you should not be demanding an eye to be taken. I know that it's really extreme. The situation's really dire. But I'm just going to keep saying, do better for Alicent, because you're supposed to be the adult. I know that she's really angry, and I agree that there should have been some kind of punishment taken, but I don't know. It was just very intense to watch all of it.
I'm going to have to respectfully disagree. Obviously, I don't condone acts of violence against any children, anywhere, at any time. But I don't think that Alicent is totally unjustified here. To her point and her plea to Viserys, that is literally his son. Okay, Jason Leaper is his grandson. Okay, and not, grandson's son, but those are literally his children. Aemond has lost an eye, and potentially that could be a life-ending wound because it could get infected. Losing an eye is pretty serious, right? He's permanently maimed. And of course, in the moment, no reasonable person is going to be like, yes, cut out another child's eye. But in the heat of the moment, when someone assaults your child so violently, I gotta be honest, if it were me, I might be calling for blood too.
It was like another kid, and it was an accident. It was an accident. I don't think that Lucerys meant to jab him in the eye. I don't think he had intended to cut his... He had a knife, yeah, but they weren't going to pull it out until it became clear that Aemond was going to try to knock Jace over the head with a rock. It all just escalated beyond what it should have in the first place. But at the end of the day, we're like, okay, kids will be kids to some extent too, but if you guys are really going to be mad at each other, you should be mad at the adults, not at the kids.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
But for Viserys to sit there and literally just dismiss it and say, this needs to stop, we need to get along, I agree with Alicent. It's not sufficient. There needs to be some more severe consequence. I don't know. It's a really dicey situation to navigate. Obviously, it's fictional, so there's that. But I think it would be really hard to say what your response would be in the moment. But I understand her visceral, uncontrollable rage. Like, when my daughter comes home and she tells me, so-and-so said something mean to me at school, the logical part of my brain is like, well, honey, that happens. It's okay. Just don't talk to them anymore. Tell them that wasn't kind. But the mama bear part of me is like, I will end that child. you know? It's true. You just feel like this really visceral reaction. But thankfully, we're logical human beings with reason and we can talk ourselves off the ledge. But for a split second, you want to hurt whoever hurts your kid as badly as they've hurt them. And so I get that. I get why Alicent is tapped into that. And I think ultimately it's just her outrage at everything that's led to this moment.
Right. And we really see that come out
in about 30 seconds.
In the open, right. Because after that, Kristen is held back. I don't remember who blocked him.
Isn't that when Daemon steps in front of...
I think Daemon steps
walks
in
out and he's like,
yeah, he comes in, keeps everybody from intervening. And then that's when Alicent really, I mean, she's already been on the, loosen her shit, but it really boils over. She grabs Viserys's knife, and then Viserys then says, "You've gone too far." And then she says, what have I done but what was expected of me? Forever upholding the kingdom, the family, the law, while you flaunt all to do as you please. Where is duty? Where is sacrifice? It's trampled under your pretty foot again. And now you take my son's eye, and to even that you feel entitled. And then Rhaenyra and Alicent have it out, and Rhaenyra says, "Exhausting, wasn't it? Hiding beneath the cloak of your own righteousness. But now they see you as you are." And then that's when Alicent tries to push Rhaenyra away, but in doing so, cuts her hand. Mm-hmm. And then this is when everybody goes quiet again, because they're like, oh shit, we didn't think anything else was going to happen, but we had yet another accidental injury happen through these fights, right? I don't think Alicent meant to cut Rhaenyra, but it just yeah, I really just think that all of these things that happened because they had something, but they didn't instigate it intending to actually follow through on the reasoning for why they grabbed the knife or why they had the knife in the first place. But it was something that just escalated in the likelihood of happening because they had the weapon. You know what I mean? But it's not like they necessarily were like, I'm actually going to stab you right now. But
I don't know. I rewound that part several times because the emotion is so, it's unexpected in that moment, right? The first time you're watching that, you're like, oh, she literally attacked the heir to the throne. That is an executable offense. No questions asked. Slit your throat, you're done. And I can't say with 100% certainty either way that she intended to slice her or that she didn't. But what I can tell you is that the importance of that moment cannot be understated. It is what we talked about earlier in the episode. It is literally the first battle of the war, right? It's fought on a very tiny front in a very tiny room in Driftmark. But that is really where the lines are drawn and you see the conflict begin.
Mm-hmm. I will say that Alicent is shocked that happened. And then, later on, she feels bad. So yeah, that was where I was like, okay, I don't think that her intent was necessarily to stab Rhaenyra either. But I think at that moment, that was the resolution, because in doing so, now she's like, I just did the same thing. So at the end of that scene, Aemond says, "Do not warn me, mother. It was a fair exchange. I may have lost an eye, but I gained a dragon." Yeah. I'm just going to say on this moment, Aemond is wise as fuck. I mean,
he really is. And this is also so important to note, because if you recall back to the previous episode, when Helaena says he'll have to lose an eye in order to gain a dragon, here is the fruition of that premonition. He loses an eye, he gains a dragon. And so I just love how that comes full circle in this moment.
Right. As we see Aemond grow up and everything, we'll see that he's always been much wiser and I think more cunning, and definitely also similar to Daemon in that he does a lot of fucked up shit too.
Oh yeah. Cunning is a perfect word to describe him.
Yes. Yeah. He wants the throne. He wants to participate. He wants to be in the action. Yeah. And he's very calculated as well.
I also thought the very end of that scene was really interesting, because as you see right before they all separate and disperse to go back to their rooms, you really see the physical lines drawn in the way the characters come together and come apart. You see Kristen and Aemond go to Alicent, and Jace and Luke, Daemon and Rhaenyra and Corlys all stand together and they face each other. And I think it's super notable that Viserys is absent from that because he clearly won't take a side. I mean, he does lean towards Rhaenyra's defense, but ultimately he will not take a stand either way in defense or opposition of either one. And I also thought it was interesting that Aegon does not go to his mother. He's absent from that scene where family is facing family. And I think that's indicative of Aegon's lack of interest or motivations in really anything that goes on. And
he's been very aloof. I think is how.
Yeah. And so I thought that was really interesting in the way that scene was designed. At the very end, you see how they physically separate into the teams.
That was very true. I had that note too. All right. So after this very emotional scene, Hightower comes in to see Alicent. And Alicent immediately says, I've disgraced myself and ensured my husband's favor will forever rest on her. And then Hightower says, and yet I've never seen that side of you, my daughter. So Hightower is clearly very proud of Alicent for picking a side and defending her children. Then Hightower says, I even doubted its existence. Alicent responds with, it was an ugly thing. I regret it. And then Hightower says, we play an ugly game. Hightower just continues coaching Alicent on what to do, especially now that he's back in the game. He's back as the hand, but I don't like that he's here at all. Freaking conniving man. But he says, and I promise you in time, you and I together will prevail. And it's just so grossly obvious how much Hightower wants power. Like, he's not speaking about Alicent or her sons. He says, you and I. Hightower is really just concerned about his own personal access to everything.
Yeah. I mean, that comes as no surprise, honestly. I think we've seen what Hightower's motivations are from the very beginning. And this is just him being a little bit more upfront about it. So after everybody has dispersed from the Hall of Nine, Rhaenyra is getting stitched up by a maester, and Laenor, who was mysteriously absent from basically the entire episode and all the important events that occurred, comes in and is like, what happened? And Rhaenyra relates to him all the events that transpired. And understandably, Laenor feels guilty, and he goes on to say, I should have been there. And he has a little pity party for himself. Rhaenyra is not here for it. She lights him up and tells him what the fuck is going on. She tells him Aemond called our son bastards in front of everyone. Like, this was not just privately to ourselves or in the courtyard, in front of literally everyone. And I will say, in Laenor's defense, I do feel that this is a moment of reflection for him. As we discussed earlier in the episode, Laena is gone. I think he's evaluating his life and his choices. And I think the person he is now is very different from the person he thought he would be. So he recommits himself to Rhaenyra. He says that he has tried, but perhaps he did not do his best. So he wants to try to make it right. He wants to be there for her. He wants to be there for the children. And in his own words, I recommit myself to you and I will raise our sons because you deserve a true husband. I do appreciate the gesture from Laenor. I think it's sweet. His heart is in the right place, but ultimately it's a little too late.
Yeah.
After the scene with Rhaenyra and Laenor, we cut to the next scene, and Rhaenyra is standing on the cliffs watching the ship take Viserys and Alicent and everybody else back to King's Landing. And you can tell that she's in a very contemplative space. I think that she is similar to Laenor, is evaluating her life and where she stands and where does she go from here. I think she's at a pretty critical junction where she needs to make some decisions on what path she's going to take. Her choices now are really important because they're going to impact not only her, but her children and their lives. Daemon comes and they have a conversation. And there's a lot of doublespeak and reading in between the lines in that conversation. Super importantly, they talk in Old Valyrian, and you know how I just love that. And usually when they do that, that's indicative that they're about to have a very important conversation. Ultimately, Rhaenyra tells him, I need you. I cannot face the Greens alone. I need you by my side. And that she wants to marry him. But of course, Daemon's very reasonable response is, we cannot marry unless Laenor is dead. And Rhaenyra says, I know. And I remembered how this episode went on this rewatch. But the very first time I was watching that, I remember thinking, holy shit, they're going to murder Laenor, right? Because the way the episode builds, there's an undercurrent of frustration towards Laenor from Rhaenyra that you can sense. And there is a fleeting few moments where you're like, Rhaenyra is going to sanction Daemon killing Laenor, of course. Surprise. That's not what happens.
Oh, luckily.
I know. So right after, we then totally shift gears and we're on the ship with Alicent. Similarly, I think she's also just contemplating everything that went down between everyone, and Larys approaches her. They have a brief conversation about what occurred. Ultimately, Larys says, if it's an eye you want to balance the scales, I am your servant. Alicent says that will not be necessary, but your devotion has been noted. A day will come when I need such a friend. And I feel this is a little bit of a character shift for Alicent. In previous scenes with them, we see that Alicent doesn't really have a stomach for violence or revenge in that way. She's off-put by that. But this is sort of the turning point where she recognizes that the road ahead is going to be bloody and everyone's going to have to get their hands dirty in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And I think that it highlights for commitment to their continued relationship and working together, and obviously foreshadows continued conspiring between the two of them as the show progresses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She also specifically says with not only skill, but discretion as well. So she's aware that Larys gets things done in a way that goes unnoticed by most. He killed off his own dad and his brother without anybody finding out it was him. So
true.
Now she knows that if she needs Larys to take care of somebody, he's going to do it without being found out. So
hesitation, I know. So after that scene, this is where I feel like some of the real tension of the episode builds. It all happens in very rapid succession. You see Daemon talking to Sir Carl, and he gives him a bag of coins and says, make it a quick death, a clean one with witnesses. And you're like, oh, fuck. He's going to have Sir Carl kill Laenor so they can get married. But then out of nowhere, you see Daemon break some random person's neck on the stairs. And you're like, whoa, who is that? Why is he killing that poor person? Then all of a sudden we're in the Hall of Nine and you see Sir Carl just waiting there. Laenor comes in and he's like, who let you in here? And Carl starts yelling at him. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought they were lovers. So why are they fighting? And it happens so quickly that you don't have time to process what's happening, but you're very confused. And so there's a squire there. And as Laenor and Carl are fighting, he's like, I'll go get the guards. So there's a witness to the conflict that occurs. The next cut is a body in the fireplace that is very badly burned, which is really horrifying. Burns really freaked me out.
Yeah, not great.
A lot of the scenes in this show are very unpleasant to watch. But Rhaenys and Corlys walk in and understandably absolutely lose their shit. Rhaenys is sobbing hysterically. Corlys is screaming, how could you let this happen? Because they just buried Laena, and to them, this is Laenor. But to us, the next thing we see is Laenor with a shaved head and Carl, and they get into a rowboat heading towards the ship. Then the aha moment comes, and you're like, oh, that's what they meant. Laenor and Carl are going to the Free Cities so that they can live the rest of their days as they wish. And it frees up Rhaenyra to marry Daemon, which is kind of the best of all the world for everyone. Initially, that scene really upset me because I'm like, that's not fair to Jason and Luke. But ultimately, Jason and Luke know that's not their real biological father. They know their real father is dead. I don't remember if at any point in time Laenor is ever really discussed again, or if Jason and Luke are told that he's not really dead, because it is sad because he is a father figure to them. And of course, I was really devastated for Rhaenys in this situation. You just buried one kid, and to think that your child was killed and then burned. I don't know. I was really devastated for her. Then the very final scene, the best scene of the whole episode. Rhaenyra and Daemon get married. And my only note was, why am I so happy about this? But here I am, happy about it.
Well, again, that whole thing, we've been waiting for something to happen with their relationship for a really long time. And so it's the culmination of all that waiting we've been doing.
Yeah. I think it's nice because for so long we've known they make a good team. And you're finally like, yes, the alliance has been forged. Now we can see how they move forward and tackle problems together because they have such a good chemistry. When every scene with them, it's always charged in some way.
Yeah. I do wonder if Laenor will come back at some point. Maybe in season 2, do you think? Or is it like, what's the point? Probably what's the point, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it would be catastrophic, honestly, for everyone involved. Although I did wonder, I probably should have looked this up before I asked you, does he have a dragon? And if so, is he just going to abandon his dragon? Because he can't take his dragon to the Free Cities because then everybody would know who he is. So
I don't know. They never addressed that. Maybe in the books, but
his dragon was sea smoke.
Oh.
Yeah, that's right. He does have a dragon because remember when they fight the crab feeder? He's also flying on a dragon.
He's flying. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So then what the fuck happens to his dragon?
I don't know. I do remember looking up which side has what dragons. And I remember seeing Sea Smoke on Team Black's side. So maybe he's just kind of an unbonded dragon?
I guess so, but you would think the dragon would follow him. I don't know. I don't really know like in depth how the bonds work. I know a little bit more how they're forged, but not necessarily how they're broken.
I mean, maybe if he just thinks that Laenor died from the dragon's perspective, because he just disappeared, so
yeah.
Maybe the C-Spec just assumes that Laenor passed, and therefore he doesn't have a rider anymore.
I don't know.
All right. We have reached the end of our analysis. So as promised, it is now day 7 in the Fantasy Court of Law. So where do we currently stand in this case?
For Team Green, I had to do some real thinking about this episode. And ultimately, there's not a lot that changes for them in this episode in terms of inclusive evidence that supports their legitimacy. However, there are a couple events that occur which are important to note because it strengthens their side in the upcoming conflict. So the first is pretty obvious here. Aemond bonds with Vhagar, which clearly makes them more formidable, but it doesn't change anything in terms of their claim to the Iron Throne. The second thing is it is revealed to us in this episode that Aegon is now betrothed to Helena, which is favorable for producing heirs if Aegon actually were to end up on the throne. Again, doesn't necessarily make Aegon's claim more legitimate, but it does secure the line of succession in a way that would probably be appealing to most people, right? And we know that a guaranteed line of succession always makes everyone a little less edgy. And lastly, Hightower is now the hand of the king again. But again, this only strengthens their side. But Hightower is a very strong ally for Team Green, right? He has the ear of the king. And at this point, we've discussed how Viserys' power has waned quite a bit. So if Hightower is there, he's probably able to make a lot of decisions and manipulate situations to their advantage. And ultimately, all of those things really strengthen Team Green's ability to get closer to the throne, but ultimately are not evidence to support their claim, if that makes sense.
I guess the only thing that I was going to say is Team Green has 3 dragons now. So Sunfire, Dreamfire, and Vhagar. And then a point against them is that Alicent does try to expose openly what everyone has speculated about Rhaenyra's children. But again, Viserys shuts that down, and he very clearly states in front of everyone, we're not talking about this. We're not going to address any such claims, and we're not going to talk about any of this anymore. And then for Team Black, they don't have any new dragons, but I guess the marriage of Rhaenyra and Daemon does solidify his dragon to their side. So
yes,
Daemon's dragon Caraxes, I think is how you say it. And then Baela's too, by association, now that they're married. You know, they get Baela's dragon as well. So that brings their dragon count to 4. Because they have Syrax, Caraxes, Vermax, and Moondancer.
Oh, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. Their marriage also is important because it strengthens her claim, right? they have the ability to produce children together now, and it's more potential heirs. Obviously, it's going to go Jace, Luke, Joffrey, and then any of their children. But in the event that any of those children are lost, not only do you have more heirs, but you have stronger Targaryen bloodlines that are potentially heirs for the throne. And the only other note that I had is that Viserys clearly once again defends Rhaenyra and her children and makes it clear that through his actions he still supports and favors Rhaenyra and her children over Alicent's. That isn't going to matter when Viserys dies. But once again, in a public proclamation, he affirms that Rhaenyra is the heir and her children will inherit after her. And so Viserys still supporting his original decision way back when. Yeah, and that's it for the fantasy court of law. Not much.
Yeah, not much has changed. All right, it is now time for our favorite moments. Do you want to go first or should I go first?
Why don't you go first?
Okay. I just had a couple scenes. So the first one, I really liked when Aemond bonded Vhagar because just really cool scene to watch and a really badass move on Aemond's part to go out there and just get Vhagar. I really like that scene. And then second, I know this was a very bittersweet moment, but I did like when Laenor made his escape at the end, just because now he can be free and he can go do as he pleases. Rhaenyra is free to marry Daemon and have somebody who can support her in the way that she needs to. So I thought it was a good compromise for them in the end. But I do think Rhaenyra and Laenor truly had a friendship, and her letting him go was a very compassionate move. Even though it does have consequences for her down the line, because obviously it opens up her to more speculation. But despite that, she still chooses to let Laenor leave.
Yeah. I imagine that was a difficult decision for her too, because Rhaenyra, sort of like Alicent, is very isolated and doesn't have a lot of allies. So although Laenor has been mostly useless, he's still someone in her corner. And he is the father figure of her children. They've spent 10 years together. So I imagine that was really hard for her to see him go and know that he really had to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those were the only two I had.
Oh, okay. So I had just a few. I also, like you, loved when Aemond bonds Vhagar. The whole scene is absolutely fantastic, but there is a specific cut where you see Aemond facing Vhagar. So you see Aemond's back and Vhagar is facing him. You see Vhagar's whole head around Aemond. And it's just such a cool shot to see them facing head on. And you just see how truly massive Vhagar is and intimidating and powerful. And so it's a really neat scene in the way that it's shot. And then it was kind of weird. So don't come for me, but I really liked when the kids fight. I thought that scene was very, very intense. I thought that the kids did a really good job acting and the directing was really excellent. And you have to remember the real actual kids, the actors, they're like 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. And so that's a really intense scene and mature content for them to do and do it so well. I thought that was just really cool for a lot of reasons. And then, of course, last but not least, the post-kid fight scene. That moment where Viserys is like, tell me what happened. And everyone is shouting. It's like, he tried to kill Bela and he called us bastards. And they're just all yelling over each other. And you can quickly see Viserys just like, I didn't mean everyone at once. Just Aemond, you just tell me. And I think you said this earlier. It's very evocative of the wedding scene, right? You just see everyone, like Daemon's looking at Kristen's looking at Alicent's looking at Hightower, and everyone is just going back and forth, back and forth. And the last part of that scene, this is probably my favorite part of the whole episode, is someone during that scene asks where Laenor is, and Alicent very quickly says, entertaining his young squires, I would venture.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Alicent, she's always good for a quick little insult. Like when she tells Laenor to keep trying, one day you may have one who looks like you. She's so quick-witted, and I love that about her.
She's got insults, that's for sure.
Yeah, she's good at that part.
All right, that concludes our episode. Thank you all so much for joining us for another episode of the Book Done Fantasy Podcast. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, or send us an email with any insights you would like to share and join in on the conversation with. If you would like to keep up with us on other platforms, then all of our socials are linked below in the episode description. Stay nerdy, everyone, and we'll catch you all next week for House of the Dragon, episode 8. Bye!
Bye! Viserys persists and says, let bygones be let bygones be oh my god. Let bygones be bygones. I had to yawn, so I put myself on mute because I didn't want you to hear my breathing into the microphone.
Okay. Like he's been off by himself. Just watching your camera. Got real close, real fast.
Real intimate. Yeah, so I have it blocked as Rhaenyra and Rhaenor. Oh my god, Rhaenor. That's a good couple name for them, Rhaenor.
Rhaenor. We ship Rhaenor.
And although ultimately that isn't going to end up mattering, I don't think that's a real word. Ultimately, is that mattering a word?
I think so, yeah.
So Aemond, I'm using Aemond. Aemond is returned. What was wrong with me?
Okay. Almond.
Almond. I'm gonna start calling him Almond. Almond
Joy.
I like that. Almond Joy. Yeah, that's literally what I was thinking about. Almond Joy. So, oh my god, we're getting goofy over here.